A cute little hobby, not a real business. We're proud of her, obviously. That's what my brother said about me at our mother's Easter brunch to a woman he had never met. He said it with a smile, the way he says everything, like the room was built for him and the rest of us were just furniture. I set my glass down. I looked at Spencer for exactly 2 seconds. Then I looked at Catherine Reeves and said, I hope you're enjoying the ham. Gail makes it the same way every year. And that was all I said. If you've ever built something with your own hands and had someone in your own family dismiss it like it was nothing, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is just getting started. Let me tell you who Catherine Reeves is. Catherine is 48 years old, a regional buyer for one of the largest home decor retail chains in the Southeast. She is also my single largest wholesale account, $62,000 annually. She is the reason Blue Ridge Pottery has shelf space in stores from Asheville to Charleston, and she was sitting at my mother's dining table that Easter Sunday because my husband James had invited her. James and Catherine had crossed paths at a Rotary breakfast 2 weeks earlier. He mentioned we were hosting Easter at my parents' place. She said she'd love to come. James didn't tell Warren or Gail who Catherine was. He didn't tell Spencer. He didn't orchestrate anything. He simply saw no reason to explain my professional contacts to people who had never once shown interest in my work. So there she sat, tulips on the sideboard, Gail's good china, glazed ham, dinner rolls, sweet tea in the tall glasses. The table looked the way it always looked at my mother's house, warm, deliberate, arranged. Spencer was mid-story about his ceramics line, the one he'd launched 2 months earlier. He was talking about production runs and retail interest and the grind of building something from the ground up. He was talking to Catherine because she was the most polished person at the table, and Spencer has always known how to find the most important person in a room. Catherine listened without expression. James set his fork down very slowly. And Spencer said those words, a cute little hobby, not a real business. The table went quiet for about 3 seconds. Then Gail laughed. That short, exhaled laugh she uses when she wants the moment to pass without anyone looking too closely at what just happened. Warren stared at his plate. He didn't look up. He didn't speak. His silence wasn't neutral. It was permission. It always had been. Catherine took a sip of her sweet tea and said nothing. I said nothing. The conversation moved on. But I need to go back, because what Spencer said at that table didn't land in a vacuum. It landed on 8 years of mortar. I founded Blue Ridge Pottery in January of 2016. I was 29. I worked out of a rented kiln space for the first 18 months, a concrete room with no air conditioning and a single utility sink. I mixed glazes in 5-gallon buckets. I fired pieces at 2 in the morning because that was when the kiln schedule was open. I kept a notebook for every formula I developed, handwritten, dated, with kiln test records stapled to the back of each page. Every adjustment, every failure, every breakthrough. That notebook is 4 years of my life in ink. By March of 2017, I had enough revenue to move into my own studio space in Asheville. I hired Helen Brooks, she was 54 then, she's 58 now, to work 3 days a week managing glazing and kiln loading. Helen had been looking for supplemental retirement income. She found it at my work table. By 2018, the studio was generating enough wholesale revenue that I felt stable, not comfortable, stable. And that was the year the contribution started, January 2018. My parents sat me down and explained that the family needed help. Warren had retired. Gail's administrative work had ended. Spencer was trying to get his food truck off the ground. They asked for $2,200 a month. They called it contributing to family stability. I told myself this was simply what family did. So I wrote the check. Every month, $2,200 for 6 years. January 2018 through April 2024. 72 payments, totaling $158,400. I know the number because I kept the records. I keep records of everything. That's not a personality trait. That's a survival skill I didn't know I was developing. Here's where those contributions went. Not to Warren and Gail's mortgage, not to medical bills, not to groceries. They went to Spencer. The food truck came first. $31,000 in startup costs, equipment, permits, the truck itself. Spencer ran it for 11 months. It closed. Then the screen printing business, $18,600 in equipment and lease deposits. Spencer ran it for 8 months. It closed. Then the online resale storefront, $11,800 in build-out and inventory. Spencer ran it for 5 months. It closed. 3 ventures in 4 years. every one of them funded by money I sent to my parents in good faith, routed directly into Spencer's next idea. The total parental investment in Spencer's failures, my contributions plus their own funds, came to $192,400 across those 4 years of active backing. And what did Spencer say about my business during those years? Nothing. He said nothing about it. When I mentioned a new retail account, Gail would smile and say, "That's nice, honey." When I told them the studio had crossed $200,000 in annual revenue, Warren nodded and changed the subject. When I shipped my first order to Catherine Reeves's chain, $62,000 a year, the account that put me on the map, nobody asked a single question. Spencer, meanwhile, was the project. Spencer was the investment. Spencer was the one who just needed one more shot, one more round of capital, one more chance to find his thing. I was the funding source. I was the quiet engine running in the background, writing checks and swallowing silence and telling myself that this was what families look like when they loved each other. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the imbalance wasn't as sharp as it felt, that I was being sensitive, that family was family. I pushed it down. I kept writing checks. Now let me tell you about Thanksgiving. November 2023, 6 months before the Easter brunch. James and I drove up to Warren and Gail's for the holiday. Spencer was there with his girlfriend, Nicole Barrett. Dinner was fine, unremarkable. The usual choreography, Gail in the kitchen, Warren in his chair, Spencer holding court at the table with a story about some new idea he was kicking around. After dinner, Spencer asked to see the studio. I'd brought a few sample pieces to show Gail, a new glaze line I'd been developing for months. The notebook was on the work table. The client outreach binder was next to it. I didn't think anything of it. This was my brother. This was Thanksgiving. I stepped out to help Gail wrap leftovers. James was in the living room with Warren. Spencer was alone in the room with my notebook for less than 15 minutes. He photographed 11 pages of proprietary glaze formulas. He photographed 6 pages of my client outreach binder. Names, contact information, order histories, pricing tiers. He did not ask. He did not mention it. He put his phone back in his pocket and came out smiling. I didn't find out until months later. By then, the damage was already moving. February 2024, Spencer launched his ceramics line, online first, then wholesale outreach. His prices were set at 30% below my wholesale rates because he didn't have development costs. He didn't have 4 years of kiln testing. He didn't have a single original formula. He had photographs of mine. Within 6 weeks, 2 regional retail chains picked up his line. Neither chain knew me. They saw competitive pricing and clean product shots. Nicole handled the photography and social media, and they placed orders. And for 6 weeks, I didn't know any of this was happening. I didn't know that 2 of my own accounts had hesitated on their next quarterly orders because a new competitor had appeared offering nearly identical product at 30% less. I didn't know that Helen's paycheck, Helen, who had worked beside me for 4 years, who depended on the studio's wholesale stability for her retirement income, was suddenly at risk because my brother had stolen my work and was selling it under his own name. I didn't know any of it until Easter. Until Spencer sat across from Catherine Reeves and called my life's work a cute little hobby. Until he smiled at the most important buyer in my professional life and said the words that told me exactly who he was and exactly who he had always been. The table moved on. Gail refilled the sweet tea. Warren studied his plate. Nicole laughed at something Spencer said next. I stayed quiet. I finished my meal. James and I helped clear the table. We said goodbye at the door. We drove home. The next week, Spencer contacted Catherine Reeves' retail chain directly. He walked into her office with a portfolio of product samples and a pricing sheet, and he pitched her his ceramics line, formulas, finishes, everything. Catherine looked at the samples. She looked at the spec sheet. She recognized every single formula. She recognized them because she had handled my IP registration paperwork through a purchase agreement 18 months earlier. She knew my glaze compositions the way a sommelier knows a vineyard. Not from a glance, but from professional familiarity built over years of contractual work. She said nothing to Spencer in that meeting. She smiled. She told him she'd be in touch. Then she called me. 4 days after Easter, 11:47 p.m. I was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. James was asleep down the hall. The house was dark except for the lamp over the table. The one with the pull chain that clicks twice, once for dim, once for bright. I had it on dim. My phone lit up on the counter. Missed call from Catherine Reeves. I picked it up. I called her back. Catherine answered on the second ring. She didn't waste time. She told me Spencer had walked into her office 3 days earlier with a full product portfolio, samples, spec sheets, pricing tiers. She told me he'd pitched the line as his own development, described a process, talked about sourcing, even mentioned kiln temperatures that I recognized because I'd spent 4 years calibrating them. She told me she'd recognized every formula, every single one. Not similar, not inspired by, identical. Down to the oxide ratios I'd adjusted by fractions of a percent over dozens of test firings. She told me she still had the IP registration paperwork from our purchase agreement. She told me that if I needed her to put what she knew in writing, she would. The call lasted 8 minutes. When it ended, I set the phone face down on the table. I sat there for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed on the street outside, headlights sweeping across the blinds and then gone. I wasn't angry. I want to be clear about that. I had been angry. At the Easter table, in the car on the way home, in the shower that night when I stood under water that was too hot and let myself feel the weight of what Spencer had said in front of the one person in that room whose professional opinion actually mattered. I had been angry for days. But sitting at that kitchen table at midnight, the anger was gone. What replaced it was something quieter, sharper, cleaner. I thought about Spencer photographing my notebook while I wrapped leftovers with our mother. I thought about the 6 weeks when my accounts hesitated, and I didn't know why. I thought about the 2 retail chains that had picked up his line, chains that should have been mine, built on work that was mine, sold at prices that undercut me because he'd never spent $1 developing any of it. And then I thought about Helen. Helen Brooks, 58 years old, 3 days a week at the studio, 4 years of showing up, loading kilns, running glaze batches, keeping the production line steady while I handled sales and development. Helen depended on the studio's wholesale stability for supplemental retirement income. She didn't have a backup plan. She had Blue Ridge Pottery, and she had me, and she had no idea that for 6 weeks her paycheck had been at risk because my brother had stolen my work and was undercutting my prices with it. Helen's face appeared in my mind. Not crying, not angry, just steady. The way she always looked when she was pulling a fired piece from the kiln. Careful, focused, trusting the process because she trusted me to keep the process running. Something inside me snapped. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a clean, quiet break. Like a kiln shelf that had been bearing weight for years, finally giving way. No sound. Just the shift. I was done pretending this was okay. I pulled my formula development binder from the shelf above the kitchen desk. I opened it to the first page, March 2017. My handwriting, my dates, my kiln test records stapled to the back of each entry. 4 years of documented development before Spencer ever set foot near that notebook. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed in the dark kitchen. I began organizing files. I didn't wake James. There was nothing for him to do. This wasn't a conversation. It was math. I worked until 2:30 in the morning. Then I closed the laptop, turned off the lamp, and went to bed. I slept through the night for the first time in a week. The next morning, May 1st, 2024, at 8:12 a.m., I sat down at my studio desk before Helen arrived. I opened my email. I typed one address in the recipient line, Robert Campbell, Intellectual Property Attorney, Asheville. Subject line, Evidence Package, Ellison IP Matter. I attached 63 pages of dated formula development logs, 17 kiln test records with handwritten dates, each one stapled to its corresponding log entry, each one predating Spencer's access by 4 years. My client list with annotation timestamps showing when each account was added and when each outreach was documented. And a scanned copy of Catherine Reeves' written statement, 6 paragraphs, clear, professional, unambiguous. Catherine had emailed it to me at 7:40 that morning, 20 minutes before I sat down. I typed the body of the email in 11 minutes. I described the timeline. I described the Thanksgiving visit. I described Spencer's product line, his pricing, his pitch to Catherine. I described the 2 retail chains that had picked up his work. I included the dates I had and the dates I could verify. I read the email once. I did not read it twice. I pressed send. The soft click of the trackpad was the only sound in the studio. Morning light was coming through the east windows. Helen's car pulled into the lot 8 minutes later. I heard her keys in the side door. She called out good morning the way she always did, half singing it, the way people do when they're glad to be somewhere. I said good morning back. I didn't tell her what I'd just done. There was nothing to add. If you've ever had someone take credit for your work and then watch them pitch it to your biggest client, hit that like button and subscribe. Robert Campbell called me back that afternoon. He'd reviewed the package. He said what I already knew. The dated logs constituted contemporaneous records of original development. The formulas matched point for point. Catherine's statement removed any ambiguity about independent creation. He asked if I wanted to proceed with a cease and desist. I said yes. May 9th, 2024. The cease and desist was delivered to Spencer's business address. I did not call Spencer. I did not call my parents. I did not send a warning. The document arrived on a Thursday via certified mail, and I know the exact moment Spencer opened it because my phone lit up 14 minutes later with a call from a number I recognized as his. I let it ring. Then Gail called, then Warren, then Nicole's number, which I'd never seen before. I let every call go to voicemail. I turned off the ringer. I went back to work. Spencer filed a counterclaim 8 days later, May 17th, 2024. His legal argument was that my glaze formulas were, and I want to make sure I say this precisely, traditional family recipes passed down from our mother, Gail Ellison, the retired administrative assistant who couldn't tell the difference between stoneware and porcelain, who had never once asked me what a glaze formula was, who had once called a raku firing that thing where you burn the pots outside. Traditional family recipes, and to support this claim, Warren submitted a sworn declaration. My father, 64 years old, retired, the man who had spent 30 years staring at his plate during family dinners, put his name on a legal document asserting under oath that the formulas Margot used were handed down through the family and were not her original creation. He lied. I want to be clear. He didn't misremember. He didn't confuse the details. He lied. He put his signature on a sworn declaration containing statements he knew to be false because Spencer asked him to, and because saying no to Spencer was something Warren Ellison had never once done in 33 years. Discovery began. Robert Campbell introduced the dated formula development logs, March 2017, 4 years before Spencer's access. 17 kiln test records with handwritten dates. Catherine Reeves' statement confirming that the formulas in Spencer's portfolio matched Margot Ellison's registered intellectual property, which Catherine had reviewed through contractual purchase documentation 18 months prior. Warren's declaration collapsed in 6 weeks. The dates were irrefutable. The logs were contemporaneous. The development timeline predated Spencer's access by 4 years. There was no family tradition. There was no mother's recipe. There was a sworn document containing fabricated claims, and there were 63 pages proving it. The word for that is perjury. Spencer's counterclaim dissolved. There was nothing left to argue. The formulas were mine. The dates proved it. Catherine confirmed it. Warren's declaration didn't just fail. It demonstrated the lengths they were willing to go. August 2024. The court granted the injunction. Spencer's entire ceramics inventory, 1,400 pieces, estimated retail value $58,000, was pulled from both retail chains. Every unit, off the shelves, out of the warehouses, removed from catalog listings, 2 sets of purchase orders, totaling $78,000, were voided the same week. The retailers didn't argue. They had no interest in selling products under active injunction for intellectual property theft. $58,000 in inventory, $78,000 in voided contracts, and the $45,000 business loan Warren and Gail had co-signed, the loan that had funded Spencer's operating expenses when he launched a business built on stolen work. $181,000. That was the total financial destruction to Spencer's venture. Not an estimate, not a range. A documented figure assembled from court filings and contract records and collection notices that would arrive at my parents' address 3 months later. Spencer showed up at my studio the day after the injunction was granted. August 2024. Late afternoon. Helen had already left for the day. I was alone, reconciling a shipping manifest at the front desk. He didn't ring the bell. He knocked twice with the side of his fist, hard enough that I heard it over the ventilation fan in the kiln room. I came to the door. I opened it 6 inches. I kept my hand on the frame. I did not step aside. He looked like he hadn't slept. Shirt untucked, eyes red-rimmed, stubble that had gone past intentional into neglect. He stood on the step with his hands at his sides, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, Spencer Ellison did not look like a man who believed the room was built for him. He started talking. He said something about how this had gone too far. He said something about family. He said something about how I was destroying him over a misunderstanding. I stayed quiet, letting him continue. He said the word family 3 more times. He said I was blowing this out of proportion. He said we could work something out. He said he'd pull the line, rebrand, change the formulas, as though the formulas were his to change. I waited until he stopped. Then I said, "Where's your apology to Helen?" He blinked. His mouth opened, then closed. His brow creased. "Who's Helen?" he said. I looked at him for a long time. My brother, 33 years old, 4 failed businesses, $192,400 in family money spent trying to make him into something. Standing on the doorstep of the studio he'd tried to destroy, and he didn't know the name of the woman who had worked beside me for 4 years. The woman whose paycheck he'd put at risk. The woman who loaded my kilns and ran my glazes and showed up 3 days a week trusting that the work would be there because I had built something real. He didn't know her name. I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, nothing. "Goodbye, Spencer," I said. I stepped back. The door closed softly. No slam, just the quiet click of the lock sliding into place. I stood in the dim front entry of my studio and listened to his footsteps retreat across the gravel lot. A car door opened, closed, the engine started. The sound faded until the only thing left was the low hum of the kiln room ventilation fan and the settling silence of a building that was entirely, documentably mine. I turned off the front light. I locked the deadbolt. I picked up my shipping manifest and went back to work. I blocked Spencer's number that night. Sitting in the truck in the studio parking lot, engine off, windows down, the Appalachian dark settling over the ridge like a held breath. I went through my contacts methodically. Spencer's cell, Nicole's number, which I'd never called but had identified during the week of voicemails, Warren's landline, Warren's cell, Gail's cell. I blocked everyone. I opened my email. I created a filter for every address associated with any of them. Personal accounts, Spencer's defunct business domain, Gail's old AOL address she'd been using since 2004. Every message routed directly to trash, unread, unreviewed, gone. I removed myself from the family group chat that Gail had created 3 years ago, the one where she posted Sunday dinner reminders and photos of Warren's garden tomatoes and passive-aggressive Bible verses on holidays. I removed Warren and Gail from my emergency contact list at the studio. I removed Spencer from the shared photo album James had set up the previous Christmas. I didn't do it in anger. I did it in clarity. James was reading on the couch when I got home. He looked up. He didn't ask what had happened at the studio. He could see it on my face. Not distress. Not grief. Finality. He set his book down and said, "You good?" I said, "Yeah, I'm good." He nodded once. That was the whole conversation. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was sharp. It was clear. The first call came 3 days later. Not to my phone, those were all blocked. To James's, Warren's number on the screen. James looked at it, looked at me. I shook my head once. He declined without hesitation. The second call came the next morning. Gail this time, also to James. He let it go to voicemail. We didn't listen. He deleted it. Over the next week, 11 calls came in on James's phone, 3 from Warren, 4 from Gail, 2 from Spencer using what must have been a borrowed number, 2 from Nicole before she left. James turned off notifications for every unrecognized number. An envelope arrived at the studio the following Tuesday, Gail's handwriting on the front. No return address, but I knew the stationery. Cream linen, the kind she kept in the desk drawer beside the kitchen phone. I held it for about 3 seconds. Then I dropped it in the recycling bin beside the shipping table unopened and went back to inventorying a kiln load. Helen glanced at the bin and then at me. She didn't ask. That was one of the things I appreciated most about Helen Brooks. She understood the weight of a silence that didn't need filling. That was the last contact I allowed. Between September and December 2024, the sequence completed itself with the kind of methodical inevitability that happens when a structure loses its hidden load-bearing wall. Nicole left in September. I learned this not from Spencer, not from my parents, but from a mutual acquaintance at a regional craft fair in Hendersonville who mentioned, almost in passing, that Spencer's girlfriend had moved back to Raleigh. The acquaintance didn't know the details. She didn't need to. Nicole had built something alongside Spencer. handled the photography, managed the social media, coordinated with retail buyers. And when discovery revealed that the entire venture was built on stolen formulas and a sworn lie, she walked away. I don't know what that conversation looked like between them. I don't need to know. She learned the foundation was stolen, and she left. That tells me what I needed to know about Nicole Barrett. October 2024, Spencer's Ceramics Company filed formal dissolution paperwork with the state. No inventory, no retail accounts, no product. Just the shell of a business that had existed for 8 months, launched on my formulas, sustained by my stolen client intelligence, and ended by 63 pages of dated records that proved every piece of it was mine. November 2024. The collection notice arrived at Warren and Gail's address, $45,000, both names on the co-signed loan. Spencer's name was on the business, but when the business ceased to exist, the debt didn't vanish with it. It rolled downhill to the co-signers, Warren and Gail. Warren called me once. The call came through on a Tuesday afternoon from a number I didn't recognize. He must have used the phone at the hardware store, or a neighbor's cell, or one of those last resort methods people use when every direct line has been cut. My phone rang. I saw the unfamiliar number. I let it go to voicemail. I did not listen to the message. I deleted it without playing it. I set the phone face down on my desk and returned to a glaze test I was running for a new spring line. There was nothing he could have said. There was no combination of words that would undo a sworn declaration. Warren had put his name on a legal document asserting that my formulas, 4 years of my development, hundreds of kiln tests, every adjustment documented in my own handwriting, were family recipes handed down from our mother. He had lied under oath to protect the son who had stolen from the daughter who had been paying the bills. Whatever he wanted to say on that voicemail, whatever version of regret or explanation or appeal he had prepared, it arrived in a world where his signature was already on file in a courthouse in Buncombe County. I deleted it. I turned off the ringer. I went back to work. December 2024. Warren and Gail liquidated their vacation savings to cover the $45,000 debt. 11 years of accumulated savings. The fund Gail had talked about at every Thanksgiving for the past decade. The one earmarked for a Mediterranean cruise they've been planning since Warren's retirement. Gone. Converted to a cashier's check and delivered to a collections office to settle a debt incurred because they had co-signed a loan for a business built on stolen intellectual property. I learned this through the same indirect channels that had carried every other piece of information since August. A cousin mentioned it at a family funeral I did not attend. James heard it secondhand at a church breakfast. The details arrived in fragments. The savings account closed, the cruise canceled, the quiet humiliation of writing a check that large, for something that should never have existed. I did not call. I did not write. I did not feel the pull I had expected to feel. For 6 years, I had written a check every month. $2,200, 72 payments, $158,400 total, because I believed that was what family required. I had watched that money flow through my parents and into Spencer's serial failures while my own business grew in silence, unacknowledged, dismissed, reduced to a cute little hobby at a dinner table in front of the one person in the room who knew exactly what it was worth. The quiet that followed the blocking, the filtering, the removal, it wasn't empty. It was the first real peace I'd had in months, maybe years. The house was just a house again. The studio was just a studio. My phone buzzed with orders and shipping confirmations and messages from Helen about kiln schedules, and none of it carried the low-grade dread of wondering when the next family request would arrive, when the next check would be due, when the next dinner would require me to sit at a table and swallow something that tasted like nothing. I slept through the night. I woke without dread. 1 year after the Easter brunch, April 2025, a Tuesday afternoon. The west windows of the studio were doing what they do every April, catching the late light at that specific angle that turns the glaze samples on the display shelf into something you'd want to photograph. Helen was in the kiln room running a glaze, firing, the low roar of the burners, a sound so familiar it had become a kind of silence itself. I was standing at the bulletin board by the front desk. Catherine Reeves' latest purchase order was pinned there, printed, signed, dated, $87,000 for the fall wholesale cycle, a single order worth more than my total revenue in each of my first 3 years of business. Annual revenue for the studio had crossed $410,000. Two of the retail accounts Spencer had briefly occupied with his stolen product line had come back to me, not because I pursued them, but because the shelf space was empty and my work was not. Catherine's account had grown. New accounts had followed. The expansion was not dramatic. It was structural. The way a kiln heats. Steady, controlled, measured by what comes out the other end. Helen came through from the kiln room, wiping her hands on a shop towel. She glanced at the purchase order on the board, then at me. "Big one," she said. "Yeah," I said. "Big one." She nodded and went to the glazing station to prep the next batch. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. Helen had been showing up 3 days a week for 4 years, and her paycheck had never missed. That was the only statement either of us needed. James came by the studio that evening to help me move a reclaimed wood display shelf I'd bought for the showroom. We carried it in through the side door, positioned it against the south wall, stepped back to look at it. The studio was quiet. The kilns were cooling. The last light was fading through the west windows, and the whole room smelled like fired clay and linseed oil, which is what a ceramic studio smells like when it's been running long enough to soak the scent into the walls themselves. James put his arm across my shoulders. We stood there for a minute, looking at the showroom, the pieces on the shelves, the new display, the purchase order pinned to the board, the studio that had started in a rented kiln space with a single utility sink and a notebook full of formulas written in my own hand. "You built a good thing," James said. "I know," I said. "I didn't do it to punish anyone. I did it because every piece in the studio has my name on it. I'd earned the right to mean that. Some doors close so better ones can open." I didn't look back. If you enjoyed this story about protecting what you've built and knowing that your work speaks for itself, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.